Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Brookline Booksmith's author event series. My name is Silas. I'm a member of the events team here at Brookline Booksmith. If you're familiar with our store, welcome back. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. A few housekeeping notes. Please put your phones on silent. If you haven't picked up a pre-ordered book, you can do so at the top of the stairs, and you can buy a book at the desk in the back after the event. And there will be time for Q&A, so get your questions ready. We are here tonight to celebrate the release of Signal Fires with author Dani Shapiro in conversation with our moderator, Claire Messud. Claire Messud is the author of 6 works of fiction, a recipient of the Guggenheim and Radcliffe Fellowships and the Strauss Living Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. She lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts with her family. Welcome, Claire. Dani Shapiro is the best-selling novelist and memoirist and host of the podcast Family Secrets, now in its 7th season. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the New Yorker, Vogue, and Time. She has taught at Columbia and New York University and is the co-founder of the Siren Land Writers Conference. And she has a picture of her hugging Oprah on her website. The surest sign of any that she has, in fact, made it. She lives in Litchfield County, Connecticut, but she's here with us tonight. Welcome, Dani. Signal Fires opens on a summer night in 1985. 3 teenagers have been drinking. One of them gets behind the wheel of a car, and in an instant, everything on Division Street changes. Each of their lives, and that of Ben Wilf, a young doctor who arrives on the scene, is shattered. For the Wilf family, the circumstances of that fatal accident will become the deepest kind of secret, one so dangerous it can never be spoken. On Division Street, time has moved on. When the Sheckmans arrive, a young couple expecting a baby boy, it was as if the accident never happened. But when Waldo, the Sheckman's brilliant, lonely son, who marvels at the beauty of the world and has a native ability to find connections in everything, befriends Dr. Will, now retired and struggling with his wife's decline, past events come hurtling back in ways no one could have foreseen. In Shapiro's first work of fiction in 15 years, she returns to form that launched her career with a riveting, deeply felt novel that examines the ties that bind families together and the secrets that can break them apart. Here to tell us more, Claire Messud and Dani Shapiro.
So, Dani, you might read us a little bit from the beginning, but I first of all am I too close to it? I just want to say, in case you don't know, that it's publication day for this amazing novel.
Claire, it's such a treat to do this with you. Thank you.
The treat's for me.
And it's a treat to be at Brookline Booksmith, always. I'm going to read from the opening of Signal Fires just a little bit. The book skips around in time, and it returns to certain dates several times. This is August 27th, 1985, and we revisit this date 2 other times in the course of the novel. Sarah and Theo. And it's nothing, really, or might be nothing, or ought to be nothing, as he leans his head forward to press the tip of his cigarette to the car's lighter. It sizzles on contact, a sound particular to its brief moment in history in which cars have lighters and otherwise sensible 15-year-olds choke down Marlboro Reds and drive their mother's Buicks without so much as a learner's permit. There's a girl he wants to impress. Excuse me. Her name is Misty Zimmerman, and if she lives through this night, she will grow up to be a magazine editor or a high school teacher or a defense lawyer. She will be the mother of 3 or remain childless. She will die young of ovarian cancer or live to know her great-grandchildren. But these are only a few possible arcs to a life, a handful of shooting stars in the night sky. Change one thing, and everything changes. A tremor here sets off an earthquake there. A fault line deepens. A wire gets tripped. His foot on the gas. He doesn't really know what he's doing, but that won't stop him. He's all jacked up, just like a 15-year-old boy. He has something to prove. To himself, to Misty, to his sister. It's as if he's following a script written in Braille, his fingers running across code he doesn't understand. Theo, slow down. That's his sister Sarah from the back seat. Misty's riding shotgun. It was Sarah who tossed him the keys to their mom's car. Sarah, age 17. After this night, she will become unknowable to him. The summer sky is a veil thrown over the moon and stars. The streets are quiet. The good people of Avalon long since tucked in for the night. Their own parents are asleep in their queen-size bed, under the plaid afghan knitted by one of their father's patients. His mom is a deep sleeper, but his dad has been trained by a lifetime as a doctor to bolt awake at the slightest provocation. He is always ready. The teenagers aren't looking for trouble. They're good kids. Everyone would say so. But they're bored. It's the end of summer. School will resume next week. Sarah's going into her senior year, after which she'll be gone. She's a superstar, his sister. Varsity this, honors that, bristling with potential. Theo has 3 years left, and he's barely made a mark. He's a chubby kid whose default is silence and shame. He blushes easily. He can feel his cheeks redden as he holds the lighter and inhales, hears the sizzle, draws smoke deep into his lungs. His father, a pulmonary surgeon, would kill him. Maybe that's why Sarah threw him the keys. Maybe she's trying to help, to get him to act, goddammit, to take a risk. Better to be bad. Better to be bad than to be nothing. Misty Zimmerman is just a girl along for the ride. It was Sarah who asked her to come. Sarah doing for Theo what Theo cannot do for himself. Change one thing and everything changes. The Buick speeds down Poplar Street. Misty stretches and yawns in the passenger seat. Theo turns left, then right. He's getting the hang of this. He flicks the directional, then heads onto the parkway. As they pass the mall, he looks to see if Burger King is still open. "Watch it," Sarah yells. He swerves back into his lane, heart racing. He almost hit the guardrail. He gets off the parkway at the next exit and eases up on the gas. This was maybe a bad idea. He wants to go home. He also wants another cigarette. "Pull over," Sarah says. "I'll drive." Theo looks for a good spot to stop. He has no idea how to park. Sarah's right. This is stupid. "Actually, no, forget it. I shouldn't," she says. They're almost home. It's like a song in his head. Almost home, almost home, almost home. Just a few blocks to go. They pass the Heller's house, the Chertoffs. As he leans forward, the lighter slips through Theo's fingers and drops into his open shirt collar. He lets out a yelp and tries to grab it, which only makes matters worse. He arches his back to shake the burning metal thing loose, but it's wedged between his shorts and his belly. The smell of singed flesh. A perfect, shiny half-moon will remain. Years from now, when a lover traces the scar on his stomach and asks how he got it, he will roll away. But now their futures shoot like gamma rays from the moving car. 3 high school students. What if Sarah had gone out with her friends instead that night? What if Misty had begged off? What if Theo had succumbed to his usual way of being and fixed himself a salami sandwich with lots of mustard and taken it with him to bed? The wheel spins. The screams of teenagers in the night. Theo, no, stop, Jesus, fuck, help, God. And there is no screech of brakes, nothing to blunt the impact. A concussion of metal and an ancient oak, the sound of 2 worlds colliding. The fender and the right side of the Buick crumple like it's a toy, and this is all make-believe. Upstairs on the 2nd floor of Benjamin and Mimi Wilf's home, a light blinks on, a window opens. Ben Wilf stares down at the scene below for a fraction of a second. By the time he's made it to the front door, his daughter Sarah is standing before him. Thank God, thank God, thank God. Her t-shirt and face splattered with blood. Theo is on all fours on the ground. He seems to be in one piece. thank God, thank God, thank God. But then there's a girl in the car, Dad. I'll stop there. It doesn't go well.
Thank you. I feel everybody may need a minute to catch your breath. It's interesting because before we came out, Dani was said that she might read from the beginning, and then she said, "You said it's not, but I worry it's not necessarily representative." And yet I was struck as you reading by how much is representative, not least this extraordinary narrator, and this cosmic scale, that the stars and the possibilities and the histories, the possible futures, and I don't know whether you'd like. I have many questions about beginning and where you and how you began. You're returning to fiction for the first time in a long time. I don't know if you'd like to talk first about that.
Sure, I'd love to. Am I on my side?
You love to, but
I'd love to, but you won't hear me.
yeah.
How's that? Oh, that good. Thanks. Somebody asked me when I finished Signal Fires how long it took me to write, and my response was 15 years and 1 year. So I started, these characters really came to me fully formed around 15 years ago, around 2009, 2010. It was after I had written my memoir, Devotion, and I was always hoping to go back to fiction, and I was always somehow being sort of shoved by some kind of like cosmic force into memoir for reasons I well understand now. And didn't completely understand, but that's what kept on appearing was memoir. And then finally there were these characters, and I loved them, and I knew them, and I had a very clear idea of how I wanted to structure this book, which is never a good idea. I don't think. I was so committed to telling this story backward in time. So I began with most of you haven't read the book yet. Obviously, it came out today, but there's a long section that takes place on one night in 2010. And then the next section is a long section that takes place on one night on New Year's Eve of 1999, so that famously Y2K New Year's Eve. So they were 10 years apart, but the problem with telling a story backward in time is you run out of runway, and then like your favorite character hasn't been born yet. And unless you're going to get completely metaphysical, what do you do with that? So I basically wrote myself into a corner, and knew it. But I was so wedded to that structure. It's the only time that a book has ever come to me almost structure first. And I couldn't see any other way. And I put it away. And a lot of years went by and a lot of life happened. I'm glad I didn't figure it out then, because I couldn't have written this book then. And then in sort of late in the first year of the pandemic, I was cleaning out my office closet, and there was this pile of manuscript pages just sitting there on a shelf, and I just sat down, and something told me to reread them, which is also not typical for me. Rereading old work is, like approached with trepidation. But I reread those pages. It was about 120 pages, and I was struck by two things. One was that I thought they were actually pretty good, which I never think about earlier work. And the other was, like, my head sort of blew open because I thought, and now it's 2020. And that was the key for me, was I've written this book that is structured on 2 different nights, a decade apart, and now it's a decade later, and who would they be? And my mind just opened up. I realized, Waldo, who you didn't hear about in these pages, but he's kind of the beating heart of the book in many ways, and he's an 11-year-old boy in the year 2010. I thought, well, Waldo would be, where would Waldo be? Where's Waldo? Waldo would be a college student. Would he have come home? Where are his parents? What would they be doing? Would Ben, still be living? Where would he be quite a lot older? Where would he be? Theo, who you met here, becomes a chef and has a restaurant in Brooklyn that becomes very successful. And he's sort of a tortured, wonderful soul. But I thought, like, how would Theo be handling his life in 2020? It was such an opportunity to go back and visit them and get to know them on a completely different layer of time. And then, so when I re-embarked, the first thing I did was write what I just read.
Mhm. So
And
that was not in the initial draft.
that was not in the initial draft. In 2010, I have Waldo refer to that ancient oak. The tree, that's what's on the jacket, the tree is really central to the story. There's this majestic oak on the Wilfs' property on Division Street. And over the years, I've been always very interested in what happens in places over time. And as generations moved into this neighborhood, they didn't know that an accident had happened there, that a girl had lost her life there. And they referred to it as the magic tree because the girl's, Misty Zimmerman's mom, planted, it became a shrine. So it was different from all the other trees, but they referred to it as the magic tree. That I did write 15 years ago, and I knew that something had happened there. I didn't know exactly what, but once it fell into place for me, I knew exactly what. And what you said about sort of the cosmic elements of, that are present in the whole narrative, I knew that had to be, that the opening had to be infused with that sense of time not being linear, and somehow I also knew that I wanted the first word of the book to be "and." I just, it felt like it's already happening.
Mm-hmm. Well, because it part of the cosmic nature, and we'll talk more about this character Waldo, but Waldo is obsessed with the stars and the cosmos. But there is this, and there's actually this line that he says. Let me find it. When he says, "Everything is connected. Everything. The lady, the doctor, me, you. It's like we're part of a galactic supercluster." And there's this sense in the book of all time perhaps being at one time, and I think it's not only in this opening passage about Misty, the lives that she might have. So there are the pasts that have happened, but there's also and I'm interested. I'm really interested if that's if that is it seems very Virginia Woolf-esque to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask you about that worldview, which somehow allows for, I don't want to say redemption, but that's too big a word, but it allows for possibilities.
That may be my favorite thing anyone has said thus far. I thought about Virginia Woolf quite a bit, and there's actually one passage in here that I won't take up time finding because I won't be able to find it quickly, but where I actually felt like, is this too much of an echo of Woolf? It's there's a passage in her Moments of Being where she describes what she calls moments of being. I have former students here who are probably all going like, yeah, you're going to talk about moments of being now, okay. Where she describes the difference between moments that are somehow heightened and more alive and the cotton wool of daily existence. And, and I had this character, Ben Wilf, who is a doctor, but he's also a real reader. And he's a reader of poetry, and he muses, he's spending, in 2010, he's spending his last night in the home that he raised his family in. He's alone there. We don't know where his wife is yet, but we know that it's all packed up with boxes and his kids aren't there. And it's a very lonely, ruminative kind of moment. and he's thinking about whether in that house their lives will continue. There's a couple from Cincinnati that's going to be moving there with their little kids and a basset hound or something, you know, like
Renovating.
and they're renovating it. Yeah, they're you know they're and the neighborhood itself is like that. There are homes that have never been touched, and then there have been homes by 2010 that have been completely redone with all sorts of, you know, gadgets and gizmos and home gyms and so the neighborhood itself felt to me like it was contending with time and the way that time loops around, and that's very Woolfian. And I noticed as Ben was musing about this that he described time in a way that that really made me think, and of Wolf and when Wolf.
The id works in, or the subconscious works in productive ways.
If I had tried to do that on purpose, it would have been bad.
But you
Yeah.
didn't. Your subconscious did it for you. Yeah. So maybe I have many questions. Maybe one of them that is, you've mentioned Ben, you've mentioned Waldo. We met Theo and Sarah. There's also Waldo's parents, and also Mimi, who is Ben's wife. And one of the questions I had for you is whether you consider it an ensemble, or whether you think the novel has a protagonist. And I was interested that you described Waldo as the beating heart of the novel. And maybe you might tell us a little about how for you the characters, whether they emerged all at once, whether they emerged, whether they sort of came out, you know, one at a time from behind the curtain, how that evolved.
That reminds me of one of my favorite things. Grace Paley was my teacher, and I remember she said, when you're writing a story and you're stuck, just have someone else walk into the room. So,
Wise.
yeah. Also the difference between fiction and memoir. You can't do that. This really began for me with Ben and Waldo, and they were very clear to me. The 2010 section opens with Ben surrounded by boxes. It was last night in his house, and he's looking out the window, and he's thinking about the neighborhood, and he looks across the street and he sees this boy who is 11 years old, Waldo, who is at his window, and from Ben's point of view, Waldo has one of these kind of newish contraptions. It's an iPad, but he doesn't know that. It's 2010. And Waldo is obsessed with this app. It actually exists. This app is called Star Walk, and it's such a beautiful app. I think the app also, very early on, I can't remember this for sure, but I think I may have discovered the app, and the app may have led me to Waldo, because there's magic in that app. Waldo feels very located and grounded in the world when he knows the ways in which he's connected to the cosmos. And so Ben and Waldo have this moment across the street from each other, and they are profoundly connected to each other in ways that we don't find out for a long time. But they meet by the magic tree. And that for me was very clear. I was really interested in that relationship between that doctor in his 60s and that 11-year-old boy, and each of their loneliness and each of their longing. And then from there, Theo emerged, Shankman emerged pretty strongly. Shankman has no first name. His wife calls him Shankman. And he's Waldo's dad. And he and Alice came pretty quickly. The character that I had to redraft the most when I came back to the book was Sarah. Sarah is Ben's, older daughter, the one who wasn't driving the car. And in my original conception of her, they're all sort of tortured by keeping silent and secret what happens on that night in 1985. But I had Sarah being sort of a more passive character, and actually had her be, sort of a Hollywood wife, and with a very successful husband, and sort of miserable. She still was an alcoholic, but she was just a different kind of alcoholic than she ends up being. And I realized, and the thought that went through my mind was, Sarah needs to be a badass. I want Sarah to have agency, and I want her to have power, and I want her to sort of go through her life and her paces in that way. Once I understood that, then she really also became really clear to me. She hadn't been. She had been sort of a shadowy character.
That's really interesting, and it makes a lot of sense to me, because one of the things I was thinking, so I had the privilege of reading this novel earlier, back before it was published, with great joy and admiration. As I said to Dani, and I'm going to try to avoid that for you guys, but it does make me verklempt. So at various at numerous points. So and it did when I first read it, and it did again when I was rereading it at the weekend. But as I was rereading it after I reread it at the weekend, one of the things I thought is, I mean, I don't know what you might say the book is about. If somebody said, "Hey, Dani, what's the book about?" But I was thinking it's in part about acceptance, and about both accepting things that must happen in the world, but also about people accepting one another, sins, failings, idiosyncrasies, strangenesses, and all. And it's interesting because Sarah has much to be, as it were, Sarah has much to be accepted or forgiven, right? Which she might not if she were an unhappy wife, if she were a passive character. But the fact is, she's made all these choices, and they have consequences, and they're secrets also, and they're secrets. The drinking is a secret. There's the wonderful moment where she arrives. I hope I'm not giving it, but she arrives at her home where she grew up, and she really wants a drink, and her dad has packed up the boxes.
Her dad's going to leave the booze for the gardener.
Right.
They're not a big drinking family.
But she doesn't know whether she can ask, right? Does shame, does...
Right, or she finds a way to ask really casually.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I mean, I think, I wasn't conscious of this, but I think I was interested in the idea that, our lives can appear one way and really, and our internal lives can be another. I mean, I've always been interested in that, but Sarah has a kind of, she's beautiful, and she's kind of perfect looking, and she's very successful, and she's described in her brother's point of view in what I read to you as, superstar, varsity this, honors that, and she's on that track. She goes through life doing that. She goes to Wesleyan, she graduates, she gets a job in a film production company, she finds a script that, gets made. I mean, she's just on this very sort of wonderful, what seems like easy trajectory, but nothing is actually easy for her. Yeah.
There's a line about how nobody would, when in her mind, where she thinks nobody would know she's teetering on the abyss.
Yeah.
I mean, I may have the verb wrong, but the abyss is definitely there, right? That's that seems, that seems, she rings so true.
I think I actually really had to, again, like going back to, I'm glad I didn't figure this model out 15 years ago. There's a lot that I needed to live a lot of life and understand certain things about human connection and our interdependence, our the ways in which we are connected to each other as fellow human beings on the planet. I needed to understand that more. And I'll tell you all something that's just completely, I continue to find this just so stunning. But so I created the character of Ben Wilf 15 years ago. And then 7 years later, or something like that, my math may be slightly off, that's when I found out that my father hadn't been my biological father, and I met the man who is, and he is very similar to Ben Wilf. And no one would believe that I had not created that character after meeting my biological father. They have the same medical specialty. They look alike. They have a kind of gravitas and dignity and a bit warmth. You know, and I didn't. And was I aware of that? No, I was not aware of that. I gave my son the manuscript when I finished it. He is an early reader of mine, and he read it. And he said, "My God, it's him." I was like, what? So I don't even know what to say about that. That goes beyond the realm of the subconscious and into some other collective unconscious realm.
Waldo knows what to say about that. Everything is connected.
Right. Waldo does know.
Yeah. It's you know, it is an incredibly wise book. And one of the things I actually wanted to ask you is, do you think you could have written this book earlier? And you answered the question before I asked it. I mean, it seems so. There are so many moments that carry the wisdom of years.
When I was first writing it, I was thinking of Ben and Mimi Wilf as older people, and now I'm close to the age that they are in that section, in that 2010 section. You know, the narrator describes, or actually it's through Shankman's point of view, that handsome older couple. And I'm like, wait, they're not that old. The way that I really think of it is that, like, the characters, those pages were, you know, just lying there, and they weren't totally dormant. There was some spark of life to them, and that I needed to live a whole lot of life, and deepen in my understanding of you know, of any number of things in order to be able to meet them, you know, and deserve them, and be ready to tell their story.
That's really lovely. We have a little time, and I wonder if we might come back to Waldo. And he's not a regular kid. And was that something, was he difficult to write? Was he easy to write? Did you research kids like Waldo?
I just love Waldo. I didn't research kids like Waldo. I spent quite a bit of time researching, you know, reading astrophysics and you know, thinking. I wanted to know something of what Waldo knows and what he's obsessed with. And also, you know, we get peeks into Waldo's life when he's an adult, and you know, he's brilliant. And I wanted his thinking. I mean, Waldo, and again, I didn't think about it this way as I was writing it, but he's probably on the spectrum. He's a little Asperger's-y, but I don't even want to define him that way. His parents, what I was interested in is that his parents are terrified of his uniqueness. And, you know, living in aspirational suburbia at a certain point, you know, in, you know, recent history, certainly true today too, that feeling of, it's just better to check all the boxes. It's better to be normal. Normal is going to make you happier. You know, being special, being different, being out of step. You know, Waldo, you know, can't catch a baseball to save his life. You know, he's out there in the outfield kind of looking at the stars while everybody's, you know, while he's missing a fly ball. And his father reacts with rage to that, which is really love, but it certainly doesn't come out that way. But he's so worried because he doesn't have the courage of his own convictions that this is, you know, a kid that just needs to be shepherded, you know, through, that he's special and he's brilliant. And his mother kind of does know, but the father kind of takes that over. So I felt like I knew him. I could see him very clearly.
With his Red Sox Jersey.
Yeah, which was another thing. His father's like really like Red Sox. I mean, they live in like sort of suburban New York City, where that's not cool. You know, like even that he had to be out of step with everybody else. His father thinks.
It's interesting because you have compassion though or we get, the narrator has compassion. I mean, we enter Schenkman's head, and it's not easy to be Schenkman either. I mean, I think that for me that's part of the wisdom of the book is that, I always get huffy when people are like, are the characters likable? And I feel like these characters are all complicated, and some are more readily likable, but all are lovable, and that I think they're because of the human complexity, but also I've invoked Woolf. Why not invoke Chekhov too? A sort of Chekhovian compassion that you afford them.
I love that. And compassion was very much the word I was thinking when you were saying that, because if we can understand, if we can enter the internal life of a character, then that character becomes lovable, if not likable, and just profoundly human. And Schenkman can't get out of Schenkman's own way. He sees the world in a certain way, and as happens when we all see the world in certain ways, but the world reflects itself back to us through the lens with which we see it. And with Schenkman, like, everybody's out to get him, and he's always going to be the underdog, and he's always striving, and he's never quite where he wants to be. So that's how he walks into every room, and that's what he gets. And also, and this isn't a spoiler, I don't think, but like one of the things that he ends up having to contend with is the realization that he, in his words, fucked up the one thing in life that you can't fuck up and you can't redo, which is that he wasn't a good dad, that he wasn't a good father to Waldo, and he can't fix that, and he knows that, and that's tragic. So I loved Schenkman. I mean, in fact, in the years that the manuscript was in a drawer, the one thing I did do is I wrote a short story about Schenkman. And Schenkman's a rower. He was a college rower, and he's always on the rowing machine in his home gym. And on these rowing machines, there's a way where you can compete with other rowers, and there's someone who was his most competitive person in college, his nemesis, whose name is Lindgren, and Lindgren is on there, and Lindgren is always beating him. So I wrote this short story that was like a kind of a male friendship story turned on its head, where Schenkman just is obsessed with Lindgren's life and finding out about Lindgren's life, and that was fun. It came out in Electric Literature. It was. I felt like, okay, now at least a couple of these characters have had a life.
Yeah, come into the light.
Yeah.
But it is, it is so true. Even, I mean, Lord knows, for some of us, exercise of any kind is just an unpleasantness. But he really makes his he sets up a home gym with like expensive equipment, and then he turns it into a sort of competitive nightmare for himself. Like, surely that you don't have to do,
But he does. He has to do that. He does that with everything.
Yeah. So, this is back to the question of one of the questions that I was holding at the beginning in my head. You said you actually mentioned in passing. You said I now know why the memoirs held me for 15 years. So I wonder if you might tell us why you think that is, and how the novel, how it's different to come back to a novel, and how this is different from the books that you've written for the last longish while.
That's a great question. I mean, I started out as a novelist, and I wrote 3 novels. They're all out of print, and I always say this, don't go find them. They're fine, but I was learning how to write. And then I wrote my first memoir, Slow Motion, and when I wrote it, I really thought of it as a curative for my fiction. I felt like my fiction was being haunted by something that I couldn't quite access, and that if I told it as memoir, that I might be done with it, might be done with the haunt. And that was largely true. After Slow Motion came out, I did return to fiction, and I wrote 2 novels that I am proud of, Family History and Black and White. And then I, inexplicably to me, got pulled back into memoir. It was not a conscious choice. It wasn't a decision. It was like almost like an obsession or an imperative. And I didn't know why. I did know that I was exploring always identity, family, secrets within a family, the corrosive power of secrets. I kept on returning to these themes, and it was as if I was, I was excavating. One of my memoirs, Hourglass, I wanted to call it an inquiry. They wouldn't let me do that. It sounded too scientific, but I was inquiring. That's what I was doing. And when I made the discovery about my father, it was as if that's what I had been, I didn't know, I didn't consciously know, and yet when I look back at my body of work, it's almost unbearable. It's sort of a staggering thing to do because, for me, because it's there on the page. I did know. I mean, the deep knowing. Christopher Bolas, psychoanalyst, refers to it as the unthought knowing. And in coming to know that, which was painful and shocking and destabilizing and many other things, it also was ultimately really liberating because it explained so much. It was like I suddenly was wearing the correct prescription, and both in terms of my history and in terms of myself and things about my own past and my relationships with my parents and within the community that I grew up in all made sense, and it sort of it really did liberate me. Writing Inheritance and having that book make its way into the world and help so many people, I felt like I had a very strong purpose, and that those memoirs culminated in Inheritance. And the feeling I had very strongly was, and now I'm done. Like, this is done. This body of work is complete. It should be a box set. Start with Slow Motion and end with Inheritance. And, when people say to me, what order should I read them in? I'm like, it really totally doesn't matter. You could just, it's a puzzle that got solved. And so my least favorite question when I was on tour for Inheritance was, what are you working on? Or what's next? Because I thought, I have absolutely no idea. I wasn't reaching for this, when I found it. But when I did, I had that feeling that I think I was looking for when I wrote Slow Motion as a curative. I think that the real curative was Inheritance, and I felt a lot of joy in writing this book. I mean, there's some dark and hard and difficult things in this book, but I think it's a book that's full of light. And my editor actually said to me, it's like an answer to grief, which I really loved. And was something that I had also been thinking about, again, because those 15 years had gone by and I knew something more about grief. But it felt to me like I could pour my whole self into this book, all of my, not in an autobiographical way, but in an emotionally autobiographical way, which I think, I love reading fiction where you feel that, that does that.
And I think that's, I as a reader experienced such a breadth of life and life experience and of all ages and types and sorts. And I think I've monopolized you for long enough, and now it's time for you guys. If please feel free to venture questions. Yes.
I'm fascinated by the way you approach time in this novel, and I just make this connection between you started this thing, 16 years ago, and it's almost like your past self was saying, you're going to need this, and sending it forward, there's like this folding of time just in its genesis. I can't wait to read this.
That's really beautiful. This woman just made the observation that it's as if my past self kind of like sent a missive to my future self through time. Like, you're going to need this someday. Here's the beginning for you. Yeah, which fits so beautifully into the themes of my work and this book. Yeah.
So, how, I know that you wrote a lot of this before, but how, now that you have your own family secret and you're doing the podcast of family secrets, consistencies that you found across family secrets, did any of that kind of help you restructure the book at all?
The question was my podcast, Family Secrets, that I've become, a bit of a student of Family Secrets. And at this point, the podcast is in its 7th season, and that means I've had 70 deep dive conversations with people about Family Secrets. And the question was, did it, sort of influence or restructure in any way the way that it didn't restructure anything. But I think surely it deepened and continues to deepen my thinking about secrets, because there are commonalities between almost all of the episodes in certain ways. I mean, the stories could not be more different, but where there is a secret, obviously there's silence. Why is there silence? What's underneath that? It's almost inevitably shame and a feeling that no one would understand, or being too exposed, or being vulnerable. And I think as I was writing further into the Wilf family and their responses to this one night in 1985, they all experience it differently, and they all react to it differently. But the silence, the idea, and it's a shared secret, really. I mean, the family never speaks of it again. They never speak of it at all. And so there's this kind of burden that they're all carrying, but they're all carrying it, even though they're carrying it as a family, each individual is carrying it alone, which I think is also something that is true of Family Secrets. So yeah, and I think it's definitely influenced the way that I've thought about it. The other thing is that on the podcast, and doesn't always end up in the show, but I always ask my guest at the end, do you wish you hadn't known? I mean, if it's appropriate, do you wish you hadn't known? And not one single guest has said, yeah, I wish I hadn't known that. I mean, ultimately, secrets. Jung describes secrets as psychic poison, and there's that liberation that I was talking about that happens when, and also the realization that, wow, it wasn't that big a deal. I mean, even if it was a big deal, it wasn't that big a deal. Like being able to speak it and share it.
Do you have a different anxiety or feeling when you're writing a memoir versus fiction? Like when you're in the process of it, and I'm not real familiar with the process, I'm definitely more of a fan than an academic. But when you say, I put this character here, or I impact this here, what does that mean, number one? And number two, when you're writing it, is there a different feeling when you put your head on the pillow at night and writing memoir versus your fiction?
The question is about the difference between writing memoir and writing fiction, and also what does it mean when you say, like, I put a character here? I mean, when you're writing fiction, it's a bit of there's a dream-like quality to at least writing a first draft. I don't know if you feel that way, but a kind of they're leading you. I mean, these characters are so real to me that I was often, just trailing behind them, seeing what they were going to do next. That's not true in memoir. I mean, I guess the fundamental difference is, I mean, it's both are storytelling. Good memoir tells a story. But the difference in Memoir is that you know what happened. You know what happened. So if you know what happened, why are you telling the story? Why is that interesting to you? It might be interesting to other people, but why is it interesting to you? Why is it worth closing the door of a room for years, possibly, and sitting with what you already know? And to my mind, the real art in Memoir is of discovery, of discovering like what belongs to what, the associations, the pieces of history that float up. It doesn't all belong. Deciding what the story is, what the shape of the story is, and with fiction, it's the whole world is up for grabs. So how do you decide where you're going to land? In the back, yeah. The question was, could I talk a little bit more about what I had said about an unfolding or an understanding of grief? I think, there's a fair amount of grief in the novel. There's the loss of a couple of people. I think both Waldo and later Ben, in certain ways, Waldo gives it to Ben. He kind of gifts it to Ben. A kind of understanding or sense or philosophy that nothing ever really truly vanishes, and that everything that has ever been alive is in some way still alive. Not in a old man with a beard in the sky kind of way, necessarily, but in a more of that sense of time looping. And that's Waldo's obsession with the stars, with the cosmos. But he feels very strongly, and he has direct experience with the death, which I won't say more about. But that is hugely impactful for him as he continues on in his life, and is able to feel that everything isn't lost, everything isn't gone. And he imparts that to other characters in various ways, especially to Ben. One more?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. No, the question was curious about the manuscript in the drawer. Do I have more of those? I kind of wish I did.
Look further.
I said before that writing fiction, when you begin, the whole world is up for grabs, but it doesn't actually feel that way. For me, it feels that way. Between books, I really have a period of time that I can never seem to curtail of, I don't know what's next, and it's, there's a patience involved and a waiting, because the next thing does present itself with a certain kind of rightness to it. And you can go try to make that happen, and force, anytime I've tried to force something like that, I end up with something that doesn't work. And even in the initial pages, I was trying to force something, I was trying to force a structure on something, and that was what stopped me. So it doesn't, I don't walk around with ideas in my head. I don't. It's more like, I'll overhear something, or there'll be an image, or few things will come together, and when they do, it starts to feel like maybe there's something there, and then it's the having enough faith in that to just begin, because basically you're beginning with, you know, just a hope and a prayer that there's going to be something there, but that's also really, really freeing and really exciting to allow that to just unfold and see what happens.